So why doesn't Camp Half-Blood use the Hestia cabin to house unclaimed campers until they get recognized by their godly parent? After all, doesn't it make sense that the goddess of the homestead would be the perfect guardian for the demigods who don't have a place to go? Well, it turns out there might actually be a couple of reasons why this isn't the case, and it starts out with the fact that until just recently, Hestia didn't even have a cabin in camp, and we learned why in the last Olympian. When Percy first meets Hestia, he recalls that she gave up her seat on the Olympian Council when Dionysus became a god, and this unbalanced the council and left her without a voice among the main 12. Eons ago, there was a discourse regarding whether or not Dionysus should be allowed on the council, but since the Olympians were not willing to honor a 13th major god, conflict began to stir regarding who should step down. Hestia, being the goddess of the family and the home, understood that to keep a war from breaking out, that she should step down and give Dionysus her seat. This is the same reason why Hades didn't initially have a cabinet camp, because when we see that he has to sit in a small guest seat at the end of the council when he does attend meetings, which is not all that often. So until the events of the Second Titan War, this wasn't the case simply because Hestia doesn't even have a cabin. But what about afterwards? We know that when Percy confronts the gods after the defeat of Kronos, he forces them to honor all of their children, and Camp Half-Blood gets started on the construction of cabins for the minor gods. In fact, in the short story titled Space Might Be an Issue, we learn that Annabeth actually constructed a set of interlocking micro-homes that could be assembled into whatever size and shape a particular cabin leader wanted. So smaller cabins could use less pieces, and larger cabins could be expanded to fit however many campers they needed. The reason why we bring this up is because she got the idea from Hestia herself, and we learn in the Heroes of Olympus that Hestia does in fact have a cabin, it's just not in use. It's an honorary addition like Hera or Artemis, since Hestia is a maiden goddess and doesn't have any children of her own. And this is where we get into our second issue. We know that camp has a hierarchy, with cabin leaders and counselors calling the shots in regards to their particular cabin. Even though Hermes housed all of the unclaimed gods, Luke was still the leader and spoke for the cabin as a whole, Hermes and unclaimed kids alike. And he was in that position long term. Hestia, however, wouldn't have any leadership because any demigod who went and stayed in the Hestia cabin would be moved out almost immediately. There wouldn't be any permanent residents of the Hestia cabin since Hestia herself doesn't have any children to look after the unclaimed demigods. It would just be a cluster of unclaimed kids that are all cycling in and out faster than anyone could rise through the ranks and become the cabin leader. And we actually get a snippet of what this might look like from both Percy and Jason. Both of them are completely alone in their cabins, meaning that they have to learn from others. But remember, Percy started learning from Luke because Luke was the one who took him in, making it a great way for him to get acclimated to what it means to be a demigod. Part of the gods' promise was to claim their children quickly and efficiently, and as far as we can tell, they've kept to their word. Both Leo and Piper are claimed literally the same day they arrive at camp, and so does Meg once the Trials of Apollo roll around. So children are getting claimed quickly, just like the gods assured. Even when the gods went dark, claimings were still happening, so campers are getting properly sorted much faster than they used to be. So if unclaimed demigod got to Camp Half-Blood, they would be put into an empty cabin with no knowledge of how camp works or what their responsibilities were if they needed to spend a night unclaimed at all. The most seasoned people in the Hestia cabin would have only been at camp for a few days max. No one would know the schedule, nor would they know what their job is as a camp counselor entails. Heck, they barely know what a demigod is, so no one would be able to provide any kind of proper guidance. In short, putting a bunch of brand new campers all together without leadership just doesn't seem like a good idea if no one has any clue what's going on. The Hermes cabin is an imperfect solution that was more severe back in the olden days of camp, but remember, that's not the case anymore. Having unclaimed demigods in the Hermes cabin provides structure and mentorship under seasoned campers who have been there for years, and it allows new people to grow and learn much more quickly. Nowadays, this problem isn't nearly as bad since campers are constantly cycling in and out of the Hermes cabin with pretty regular certainty. Hear me out though. Rachel moves into the Hestia cabin, so one, she stops living in a cave, and two, she could help them transition. You know Hestia would take her. The reason why it became so cramped back when Percy joined was because minor gods were not given anywhere to put their kids, and gods were notoriously irresponsible when it came to claiming their children. We don't even know if minor gods could claim their children until just recently, since Ethan Nakamura had to meet Nemesis in order to confirm his parentage, and we don't know of any major minor demigods from the original series. Back in the day, campers might go years without ever learning who their godly parent is, and so the Hermes cabin would have to house unclaimed demigods without ever allowing them to move out. So back in the early days, campers were joining in the Hermes cabin without ever leaving, which is what led to the subpar, overly cramped conditions that we see in The Lightning Thief. but we don't see much of that anymore. Now, the Hermes cabin is actually pretty well managed, and the conditions are much better than what they used to be. Campers are only there for a few nights at best while they learn what the camp has in store, but as far as we can tell, Piper and Leo never even had to spend a single night there. Leo was claimed just a few minutes after landing in camp and immediately brought to cabin 9, and the only time Piper sleeps before being claimed is when she passes out and is brought to the big house, but she's also claimed at the campfire later that night, so neither of them ever set foot in the Hermes cabin. Jason is a bit of an odd case since he's technically already been claimed, but they learn he's a child of Zeus around the same time that Piper is claimed. This makes us hopeful that conditions in the Hermes cabin have drastically improved, but every now and then when a god takes their time claiming a child, then they probably still go to the Hermes cabin where they can learn from more experienced campers. Hermes children aren't going anywhere, and they're more than willing to help show newbies the ropes until their godly parent claims them. And even though the Hestia cabin is good to have for honorary reasons, it doesn't make much sense to make this the cabin for the unclaimed. Since Hestia doesn't have any children of her own, there would be no one to guide them or care for them aside from Hestia herself if she wanted. I think she would want to. We know that she spends time at camp and usually sits at the hearth, but very few campers ever actually come talk to her. So hypothetically, she could care for unclaimed campers if she wanted to, but that also doesn't make much sense given just how quickly the gods are claiming their children this time around. But that's our take on why the Hestia cabin likely isn't being used to house any unclaimed demigods, and why it wouldn't make much sense for it to be structured that way anyway. But what do you think? Does this make sense, or is there something else that we're missing? As always, we love this series, we love talking about this series, and we'd love to have you join on the conversation down below. Take care, demigods, and have a good one.